And what role has the museum played in evolution education?
The museum has played a role in terms of our collections. So our collections have always served as a good resource for doing research.
And what scientific collections do you have, just for people
Yeah,
that
so
know?
we have an outstanding collection of insects. We've got over 3 million specimens. We've got one of the largest cryogenic collections of insects which are preserved for DNA, one of the largest ones in the world. We have an outstanding botanical collection. We have a huge lichen collection. We've got real strong collections with our fish and with our amphibians and our reptiles. And then we've got other collections, mammals, where we've got some real strengths in birds.
Yeah, and this all is behind, like people who have come to the museum, they may see some of the stuffed animals and a few things, but this is behind the scenes, right?
This is behind. What people don't see is that we've got 4 million plus specimens that have scientific information that are critically important for our understanding of biodiversity and our tracking of what's happening to species over time. Right? So we've got that. So in that sense, we have had a tie to evolution and what's been developed.
And had there not been a museum,
biology,
perhaps you wouldn't have been as successful in getting grants and
Absolutely.
all of this other stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So
So
it's played a role there.
Where we have lagged has been in providing exhibits which explain the fundamental principles of evolution. Now, about 5 years ago, that changed, and that was under a different director, where finally the decision was made, it's time for us to teach evolutionary principles. There were a lot of reasons why it wasn't taught prior to that. There was a lot of resistance among some people who were in positions of authority within the museum. But for the past 5 years, we have taught evolution, and we're continuing to develop more exhibits which teach additional principles of evolutionary biology.
And do you guys track data? Like, because I mean, I imagine tons of elementary schools and kids come through, and now instead of just seeing stuffed animals, they're seeing, the hominid skulls.
They're seeing
like the
hominid
ones
skulls,
all behind you, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
all this other stuff. Are you seeing? Is there pushback, or are people embracing it? Or
if you recognize the number of people who come through our doors, right? So past few years have not been typical years because of COVID, right? But in a typical year, we'll have close to 100,000 people who come through our doors in any given season. With those people coming through our doors and seeing these exhibits, we only occasionally get kickback from a handful of people who, for whatever reason, feel that we've done something that's inappropriate. Vast majority of people really enjoy and are engaged with these exhibits.
And as you come through, for those of you who come to the museum, when you come through, before you get to kind of the evolution exhibits, there's that hall about how to reconcile.
Yeah.
How was that decision made to have that be part of a museum, right? Like, we've got to reconcile this, and then we can go look at the science.
Yeah. Well, part of that was a design decision, because we have parts of our museum which have a very heavy kind of religious bent to them, and then parts of our museum, the majority of the museum, which is focused on natural history and science, like what you would typically see at a natural history museum. There had to be a way to form a connection between those ideas. And reconciliation, given our clientele, reconciliation is something that's important to us. In some ways, our exhibit on reconciliation is dated. It needs to be updated. I think we can do some things more effectively than what we've done there. But we at least introduce the topic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this channel's a lot about this idea of, if you want to believe, you can, and you can reconcile with the best science that we have.
Yeah.
Do you envision a day when maybe, this life history museum that maybe doesn't need that or doesn't have that? It's more just like any other natural, or do you think that's always going to have to be a role?
I think that'll always be a core, right? Because one of our missions here at BYU is to help build the faith of our students and strengthen our faith community. And we can do that by teaching them science, but we can also do that by helping them recognize that the science can actually form a foundation for their faith, and that it does not need to be corrosive, it does not need to be in opposition. What it can be is something which helps them better understand and be better committed to their faith.
What other are there other topics besides evolution that you think the museum could help, or maybe even the BYU community, where science could come? I mean, I'm thinking like climate change, or are there other things where you think that we still need to advance a little bit more?
Yeah. So absolutely, the answer is absolutely. For people who haven't been to the museum recently, just 1 week ago, we opened up our exhibit on COVID, understanding COVID and understanding pandemics, and on climate change. And those are two new areas, two new kinds of exhibits that this museum has never had before. And the reason why we did this is to recognize that one of the important messages that museums need to get across to the public is science, how science works, and how science is helping us deal with some critical issues that we as a society are facing. So I totally get people come to the museum and they love to see an elephant, they love to see a rhino, giraffe. Those are cool things to look at. But what we want to do is develop a more meaningful experience, so they come in and they can recognize, well, that's biodiversity. This biodiversity that we see today is not the same diversity we saw yesterday, and give it 20 years, a lot of these things are going to be extinct. The planet is in crisis. What is my personal role in helping towards making climate change ease, towards helping species that are in peril?
Yeah.
So what we want to be is a place where we are delivering messages to the community of, the world is in dire straits, but there are things that we can do to help.
Yeah, well. I'm excited for the direction you've already taken the museum. I congratulate you on what you've done so far, and I'm really excited to see where it's going to go. Yeah. So, kudos on that. Is there anything else you want to say in regards to like the museum and its role in education?
Yeah. So this has been my goal, right? So. Excuse me, ever since I've been director of the museum, and it's only been a year or so, we have a reputation of being a dead zoo where school kids can come and see dead things on a wall. And I honestly, I like looking at organisms too, and that's a neat experience, and that's what got me excited. So I totally get that. Mm-hmm. But what I want us to be is something which is more important to our community and more important to our student body, to get out these incredible messages that are critically important. So it turns out, and they've done research on this, if you ask the question, who do you trust the most? Who do you trust for sources of information? Number one is friends and family, right? Those with whom you have a personal connection. Number two are museums. You don't start seeing things like professors, scientists, national media, and other sources of information. Those are much lower on the list. So because of that, there's a recognition in the museum community that we have the ability to speak with an authentic voice to get out messages which are important. And so what is continually on the back of my mind is, what are the messages we need to convey, and how can we best convey them?
That's powerful.